Too big to rig. We're not going back. Kamala broke it. Trump can fix it. What up, folks? Once again, it's your boy Tim. It is indeed election day. You've undoubtedly heard some of those slogans and phrases. That's what we're dealing with going into this election. America first is another one you might be familiar with. But we as we know, the election is still somewhat too close to call on this election day morning. We're going to talk about who has the most to lose in this election, whether the victor is Donald Trump or whether the victor is Kamala Harris. Who has the most to lose? And there are folks there are winners and losers no matter who wins the election. I want to talk about that. Now, we're going to start it out from a standpoint of the most serious. And when I say winners and losers from a standpoint of being the most serious, I mean, if the wrong candidate is the victor, people could die. I'm not talking about the economy or anything like that. I'm talking about people could actually lose their lives. Now, this sounds a bit extreme, but the fact is most of these are international concerns. Number one being Vladimir Zelensky of the Ukraine. Obviously, Trump's promoting an America First agenda, not really favorable to continuing to help out the Ukrainians militarily, and Kamala Harris is on the other side of that. We've already discovered and warned Vladimir Zelensky a few years ago of a plot by the Russians to take his life, to assassinate him. You're not going to get that kind of surveillance if we're no longer assisting him. So Vladimir Zelensky is probably at the top of the list as someone who would be on the run for the rest of his life if we suddenly become favorable to the Russians or simply get out of that conflict. If we just wipe our hands clean of that conflict and leave the chips to fall where they may, his life, his family, they're all in danger, and they could easily end up on the wrong side of, as Trump say, 9 barrels of a long rifle. So Vladimir Zelensky is number one. The Ukrainian people is probably somewhat of a close second, because obviously if we back out of that conflict, a lot of folks in the Ukraine will be slaughtered. So number one, folks who are paying close attention to the U.S. election and hoping and praying one side or the other wins is Vladimir Zelensky and the Ukrainians. Number two is Vladimir Putin, the leader of Russia. Vladimir Putin, now he's not at risk of losing his life, but make no mistake about it, a hell of a lot of our allied countries are now viewing him as a war criminal. And I do believe that folks are suggesting that if he was to move abroad, he could be at risk of getting grabbed and, placed under arrest. I don't know if I feel as confident with that. But still, I'm bringing him up because as long as we keep supplying the Ukrainians with weapons, there are Russians that will die, because Putin is sending them into war against the Ukrainians, and with our weapons, the Ukrainians are killing a hell of a lot of Russians. So once again, people will die regardless if Trump or Kamala Harris wins due to our stance on that war. You could probably, for an honorable mention, for lack of a better term, toss in the North Korean soldiers that are now going into that conflict. As long as we keep helping out the Ukrainians, some of those North Korean soldiers that have been sent to aid Russia, some of them are not coming back home. So you could probably add them in there as well. Next, this is once again not necessarily a death to the individual, but could be to his people. Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel. Once again, big difference between how Trump is going to view the desires and actions of Benjamin Netanyahu and his administration versus how Kamala Harris would view his administration. The Israelis are going to be treated kind of favorably by America, regardless of who wins the election. But it's a big difference between Trump and his stance on what Benjamin Netanyahu is doing versus Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris will favor Israel because that's what the United States does. But they're going to be kind of placing limitations just like Biden was and not necessarily agreeing with everything Benjamin Netanyahu does. Trump has already stated he wants Israel to be allowed to finish the job. So obviously this could lead to a hell of a lot of deaths in the Muslim community for a war in which they started October 7th. But many believe Benjamin Netanyahu is going well above and beyond what would be considered as self-defense. So Benjamin Netanyahu is obviously very concerned in the outcome of this election. Coming back home, we're going to talk domestically now. We're going to talk domestically, and it's not to suggest there are not other international parties that are really concerned with our election, such as our allies. Trump once talked about getting us out of NATO, breaking up the Paris Accord. So there are other international concerns that are really paying close attention to this election. I just didn't add them. Feel free to state them in the comments, and I'll certainly respond. You know we don't block, ban, or censor. The immigration community, I'm talking domestically. We're now home in the United States. The immigration community will obviously have a lot at stake in regards to who wins, whether it's Kamala Harris or Trump. Obviously, the perceived administration, whatever side you're going to go with, obviously they're going to be treating immigrants completely different. The Trump administration, if he's reelected, versus what Kamala Harris would do if she's elected, it's literally 180 degrees of each other. So the immigrant community would probably domestically be the most concerned with this election coming up. And when I say immigrant community, I know a lot of my Trump supporters are going to say, yeah, illegal. No, I'm not talking about illegal immigrants. I'm talking about immigrants in general, such as the Haitian migrants who, by way of their own mayor of that town, Springfield, Ohio, by way of their own governor of that state, are all saying that they're here legally. They're not, those Haitian migrants are not illegal immigrants, and Trump has promised to kick them out too. So I do want to say the immigrant community are going to be very concerned with whether Kamala Harris or Trump is the victor because of how both parties have been treating immigrants. Kamala Harris has a fairly friendly stance to immigrants. Even illegal immigrants or even undocumented immigrants are treated kind of with, open arms from the Kamala Harris community. They're treated with incredible hostility from the Trump administration, suggesting that they're poisoning the blood of this nation. They're coming to rape and murder everybody. And they've just been let out of prisons and insane asylums. So completely 180 degrees there. If you're an immigrant, this election means a hell of a lot to you. My humble opinion, if you do not have official status as a resident of America, an official green card, you're not officially a citizen of the United States, maybe you've done everything right and you're going through the process. It can take several years to become a legal resident of America. Doing everything right, it can still take several years. My humble opinion, until your paperwork is stamped under the Trump administration, if you don't have that stamp, you're not safe. I don't care how great it's been going, how much you've been following the law and doing it the right way. If you're not officially in, I don't believe there's a guarantee that you'll be allowed to become a resident once Trump gets in office. I do believe there will be some changes to the number of immigrants allowed to migrate here legally. Not talking illegal, I'm talking legally. I don't know how many immigrants we take in legally annually, but I do believe Trump and his administration will be interested in lowering that number. So if you don't have official residency at the time Trump becomes president, you're probably not totally safe, in my opinion. Now, this one has nothing to do with loss of life, obviously, but I do want to bring this one up because I think that it is a big concern. Where it could have something to do with loss of life. Women and the unborn. The Kamala Harris administration would be favorable to saving the lives of women and allowing women to make these decisions about, as they say, what happens to their body. The Trump administration are going to be more focused on saving the life of the unborn under the suggestion of, if the woman did not want to go through this process, she simply should have not had sex, or, as some might say, kept her legs closed. They're not focused necessarily on saving a woman. They're focused on saving the life of the unborn. The liberal side of it is going to be focused more on saving the life of the woman, or, allowing a woman to make this decision. The right is focused solely on saving the life of that unborn. So some people could lose their lives in this. I mean, obviously, if women are allowed to the freedom to choose, they're going to be taking the life of the unborn. So obviously some unborn babies are going to lose their lives if Kamala Harris is elected. But with Trump continuing to promote pro-life legislation, some women are going to lose their lives because they're going to be forced to do things that might not be conducive to their survival in effort to save the baby. So there are some lives that are going to be lost, depends on what side of the aisle wins the election. Last but not least, I don't think this will result in the death of anybody, but it is an honorable mention because this community is going to be very much concerned with who wins. The transgender community. Big difference in how the Harris administration would view the transgender community versus how the Trump administration would view the transgender community. I tend to almost place it akin to how both communities view immigrants. My humble opinion is you're not going to get a lot of favorable legislation of any type out of the Trump administration. You can go about your merry way, but don't expect any treatment that's favorable to you, any laws that are favorable to you, any provisions that understands your plight. Do not expect any of that from the Trump administration. Not to mention there may be limitations on where you can go and what you can do, such as, playing for the wrong sports team or going in the restroom somewhere. So I don't think the transgender community is favorable to a Trump election at all. And as I said, I don't think Trump's campaign would not be favorable to the transgender community. The Biden-Harris, well, we're talking about Kamala Harris and the Harris administration, I don't know how far they would go in terms of being friendly to the transgender community, but she is on record being favorable to allowing, prisoners to have sex changes. She's certainly far more favorable to the transgender community than President Trump would be. I'm talking about by a whole different universe. So the transgender community is going to be paying attention to this. In fact, I would stretch it and say the LGBT community as a whole is probably going to be more favorable to the Kamala Harris community. But let your boy know in the comments, did I miss any group that should be really concerned with this? And I'm not talking about from an economic standpoint. I know the citizens want the price of groceries and gas. And I'm talking about things where people have a real concern where they may lose their lives or really have their lives uprooted. I'm talking about from that angle. Let me know if I missed anything. Feel free to state that in the comments. As always, subscribe to the channel. Smash that like button. I'll see you in the next video.